Hey, it's Renee from the craft table. We have reached the end of our summer embroidery stitch along. I'm a little sad to see it end. I really enjoyed the challenge of posting a weekly embroidery tutorial. I sure hope you enjoyed the 14 weeks of stitching together. If you'll remember, the very first time that I stitched the blue magic panel, I made it into a pillow cushion. And with the panel that I embroidered during the stitch along, my plan was to have it framed, and I was going to hang it at my home in Orlando. I don't mention this every single time, but for those that have watched all the videos, you know that I've spent my summer in Montana. So it's kind of weird. I say this is Renee at the craft table, but obviously I'm not at the craft table. But anyway, so that was my plan. And then it still is my plan. But I realized I would not be able to demonstrate all the stitches on my fabric panel and have it framed in time to show you for this week. So what I did is I had my pillow, I unstitched my pillow and I took that original panel to a local frame shop here, and they framed it for me. And so you can see it back there in the background. It doesn't really go with the decor of where I am currently, but it's going to look terrific at the craft table. One of the ways we'll talk about finishing our embroidered fabric panel is to have it framed. You can frame it yourself. I did not have time for that. So like I said, I took it to a local frame shop. So I'm really excited to have this hung at the craft table. It's got the really fun blue frame. This is a really fun way of framing it. And I'll get a better picture and include it in here so you can really see the color of the blue and how the blue frame and how it plays with the bright colors of the fabric panel. So in this video, I'm going to link to different tutorials. All of that will be included in the description, so you can link to all of that. If you do get the Stitch Along newsletter, I will also have it in that with direct links. So when you open up your newsletter, you can just click on it and it'll take you to the different tutorials, depending on how you want to finish your project, or just to kind of see if you're not sure which might be the best for you. There are quite a few out there, and obviously you don't need me to tell you different ways to do this. You can go on Pinterest, you can go on Google, you can look on Instagram for different ways and different patterns. I just wanted to make it kind of easy and point out a few things. All right, well, this is it. As far as the stitch along goes, you made something beautiful, something that's yours, that you hand embroidered. And I hope you're really pleased with the results, and you should be very happy and proud of yourself for finishing it, however you decided to finish it. Like I said, this is what was great about this panel. You can stitch as much or as little as you want to, because it's a gorgeous piece of fabric to begin with. So you really can't mess it up. And if you think you've messed it up by doing a stitch that's not perfect, that's less than perfect, opinion, there's no such thing. Imperfectly perfect is what I like to say. But the good thing is, if you don't like something, it's easy to take out stitching and either leave it as is once you've taken the stitching out, or stitch over it if that's what you want to do. Since I am not demonstrating how to do any embroidery stitches, I don't need my overhead camera. I have put together a short presentation on finishing up our embroidered fabric panel and the next steps and how to incorporate it into another completed project. So the first thing you want to do when you're all done with your stitching is to remove the fabric panel from the embroidery hoop. If for some reason you were fortunate enough to find a hoop that is large enough to cover your entire design and you want to keep it in the embroidery hoop, then obviously that is an option as well, is to just display your stitching in the hoop. But if you're like me, where the design is quite large and the hoop is much smaller, then you're going to want to take it out of the embroidery hoop. And then you're going to want to give it a really good press. It's been handled quite a bit for, these few months, and there probably maybe some marks left behind from your embroidery hoop. So I take a towel and I put it on my ironing surface, and then I get my fabric panel and I put that face down on top of the towel and I give it a good press from the back. And the reason why this is recommended is because the towel gives the stitches some cushion when you're pressing, and there's less risk of you smushing or flattening out any of those beautiful stitches. So you're going to want to give it a really good press. And I find that when I'm using the flatter spray, it really helps remove the wrinkles. It's not a true starch. It does something with the fibers in the fabric, and it removes the wrinkles in a really nice way. So I highly recommend using flatter spray. The other thing what I recommend is not to trim your fabric panel or square it up just yet. You want to, wait until you figure out how exactly you're going to use that fabric panel, because some projects might require a little bit of extra room around it. If you're stitching it into something else, then of course you're going to lose a 1/4 inch all the way around at least. And as we know, at least if you're using the Blue Magic fabric panel, there's not a whole lot of room around the actual design. So those are my tips on prepping your panel after it's been stitched and before you decide to incorporate it into another project. What are some ideas of using this stitched fabric panel? One way is to turn it into a pillow cushion, and you've heard me say this multiple times. That is what I did with my very first stitched panel. And I used the tutorial by Amanda Jean Nyberg, Crazy Mom Quilts. It is an envelope style backed pillow. And I've used her tutorial quite a few times. It's really good. It's super user friendly. And the great thing about this tutorial is the size. Her directions just happen to be the exact same size of the fabric panel that we're using. So you don't need to change anything as far as her supply list and cutting or anything like that. You can just follow her instructions. So I've linked it in the description of this video, and it's also in the blog post that I will link to. There'll be all kinds of links attached to this YouTube video, so you can find everything that you need on doing that. I did do I just want to mention a few things that I took my fabric panel and I squared it up 20 and a half inches square. So, all sides are 20 and a half inches. And depending on how your fabric panel is cut, if you got the Blue Magic fabric panel, there's two panels that come in one cut of fabric. So when I was trimming mine, I just made sure that the design itself was, centered in what I was cutting. The other thing that I did that is not really mentioned in her tutorial, because it was designed for quilt blocks and those types of pillows. And so with that, I think the tutorial mentions using batting and quilting, your pillow top. So I ignored those steps, but what I did just to give my top a little bit of weight to it is I backed it with fusible fleece. And then since it was fusible, I didn't have to worry about doing any kind of quilting or anything like that. I just cut it to size and fused it on the back of the fabric panel before I assembled it into the pillow cushion. And so the rest of the instructions and supplies, you'll need fabric for the back of the panel. And I used Robert Kaufman Essex linen. Again, it's a little bit thicker than a quilting cotton. So this is one way of finishing up your fabric panel, is to make it into a pillow. Like I said, I liked this tutorial because it's really easy. There are no zippers involved. And the description or the directions happen to be perfect for the size. And I have made this pillow before, so I knew it was a pretty easy tutorial. And all you need to do is just get a 20-inch pillow form and pop it right in there once you're done. Now, of course, this is all based on if you're using this particular fabric panel. Your fabric panel may be a little bit different in size. So of course you want to check that before you start following my cutting instructions for, a 20-inch pillow. You can, regardless of whether it's this panel or another panel, you can add borders to your panel before you decide to incorporate it into a pillow. But like I said, if you're using the blue magic fabric panel, you don't need to do any of that to make a 20-inch pillow. And as with any finished project, you want to make sure you add a tag, a cute little tag on the back, and or a label with your name and when you made it, and if it's a gift, who you made it for. So it's always good to label our homemade items. So another thing you can do is incorporate the panel into like a large tote bag. I found a particular tutorial. I have not made this, but it is Madam Sew. And again, I'll link to that I'll link to that tutorial. But it's it's for an extra large flat bottom bag. And I read over the instructions and it seemed pretty user friendly and easy to follow. I think she even has a video in addition to her typed instructions with pictures. If you're using this panel, you will have to make a few adjustments on her measurements, but she makes it really clear what size each pieces are. So just by looking at it, you can just, see where you need to change the measurements. But I have also written them out. She has 2 main pieces, 2 side pieces, a bottom piece, and then strips for the handles. So I changed the measurements to what I think you would need for this size panel. So when it says 2 main pieces, of course, one of the main pieces is your stitched panel, and then the other would be the other side of the tote bag. Now, again, you may have 2 of these panels, and you can do this whether you've stitched both of them or just stitched one if you wanted to use the other panel on the back. But these dimensions that I've listed here should be the dimensions that you would need to make the bag. Another way you can finish and display your embroidered panel is by having it framed. I showed you the picture of the one that I had framed. And I think I went into a long story of how this was originally the pillow. And then I took it out of the pillow form and had it framed so that I could show you in a timely manner what it would look like framed, rather than finishing up the one that I'm stitching along with you and then coming back, 3 weeks, or depending on how long the framer takes. So anyway, so this is the first panel that I stitched, and I had it framed at a local frame shop, and I had it framed in a cute way with a bright frame because it's going to be hanging at the craft table. So the way that she framed it is she suggested for this, no glass, and there's no mat or anything like that. So it's just the fabric, and she attached it in such a way that, it's all nice and neat, and then she framed it. And I believe I mentioned this in the introduction. I didn't have a lot of options when I went to frame this one because I took it, I unstitched it from the fabric panel. So I only had a 1/4 inch leeway all the way around my design. So she didn't have a lot to work with. I am hoping that I can frame the one that I just finished with the stitch along, that I can take it to a local frame shop in Orlando, and they can do it in such a way. I have this vision of it sort of floating on top of a mat board, and not really a shadow box, but sort of. So I don't know, something that I can put in my home. So if you decide to have it framed, it's going to look, there's so many different looks you can get out of that, depending on how it is framed, what type of frame, what color frame, what width of frame, whether it has glass on it, whether you've matted it or whatever. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. And the other way that you can frame a fabric panel, I've done this when I've done the collage, the fabric collage quilts, small quilts, is to wrap it around a stretched canvas. And it may be more difficult depending on how big your fabric panel is. You do need a little bit of extra fabric to wrap it. But I've had really good results with doing that. And then I've just used a staple gun and I've stapled it to the back. And then you can either hang it as, just like that, or you could then take that and have it framed as well. So the other thing you can do is you can take your stitch panel and use that as like a quilt block and incorporate it into a quilt, either a wall hanging or a table topper, table runner, or a bedside quilt. You could do that. Now, this is just a digital mock-up that I have right here. It's the embroidered panel as the center. This one again would finish at 20 inches. So you just kind of do the math. I did this where there's 5 blocks, starting off with, 5 blocks around the sides. And so that would make each square finish at 4 inches. So you would just cut your squares at 4.5 inches and, do a border on the top and bottom and sides, or sides first, top and bottom, and make a cute wall hanging out of that. If you do this particular mock-up exactly how I've done it, it would finish with being 36 inches square. You can also make it into a full size, into like a bed size quilt. You can, as I mentioned before, you can make it into a table top, just, like something that you put at the center of your table, a centerpiece, or make it longer as a table run, or however, you decide to do it. But again, I just took that center square, it finishes at 20 inches. And the same thing, I just made a mock-up using squares that would finish at 4 inches. And I just kind of did it in a way that would, be this mock-up. If you were to use exactly the number of squares that I used, it would be a pretty small quilt. It would be 45 inches by 60 inches. But this was just, like I said, this is just a digital mock-up to give you an idea. You can make it larger by adding, more squares, either on the side or tops and bottom. The embroidered center doesn't even have to be, or the embroidered panel doesn't even have to be in the center. You could assemble it so that the embroidered panel is offset, meaning it's not in the center. It's like, an alternative grid where the other fabric is a solid, so you have a lot of negative space. And that would, I think, also be a really cool look. You could do something like that to, make it unique. You could also use, instead of the 4-inch squares, you could use 5-inch squares. So, the math works out that if your center is 20 inches, I've got 5 squares around the sides that would be finishing at 4 inches. Well, you could do 4 5-inch squares instead. And that might, that's a little bit less piecing because your blocks are bigger. You could use, instead of squares, you could use half square triangles. You could use churn dash, any type of block. You could do that. I've mentioned the negative space. I didn't click that on this presentation, but that's another really good one. You could do a log cabin style piecing so that you still have your fabric in the center, but you would either, whether they're squares or strips, you would just work around like with a log cabin. That's another idea. And then also Jen Kingwell has a really cool quilt pattern in her quilt recipes book called the Dalesford quilt, and it's a medallion style quilt. She lists such a variety of ways to make those rounds around the center that there've just been so many lovely quilts that I've seen made using this particular quilt pattern. So again, we've gone over the pillow cushion, a tote bag, framing your fabric panel, quilting it, whether it's something small like just a center table topper, something a little bit bigger like a table runner or a wall hanging or a quilt. I'm sure there's a lot of other ideas that I have not thought of. So now that you have finished in no particular order, I recommend that you proudly display your embroidered piece. You pat yourself on the back. You've done an amazing job following along all these weeks and applying the stitches to your own particular fabric panel. You can do a happy dance. You can post that on social media, or if you're like me, you would just do it and no one would ever see it. But definitely take a photo, share your photo on social media. You can also email it to me. Some of you have already done that, and I've loved seeing them all. I've gotten so many lovely comments and feedback. There's, a group in Virginia, a group of quilters that have gotten together and have stitched on their panels each week together. I know there's a group in Orlando doing the same thing. I've heard of a mother and daughter team duo stitching together. And I had a friend send me a picture of her stitching in Maine along with her stitching while she was in Florida. Anyway, I love that. So thank you so much for sharing those pictures with me. So this is the end of our Summer Embroidery Stitch Along. I hope you have had a fantastic time. I know I have. Thank you again for doing the stitch along with me. Leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, share it with a friend. And until I see you again, happy stitching.